Mosaic, a daily news program from Worldlink TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The retired U.S. General Jay Garner arrives in Baghdad. He is Iraq's new leader. He is there to assume his position as head of the temporary civil administration. Garner promises to restore the necessary services as soon as possible. Tens of thousands of Iraqi Shiites head to the city of Karbala, commemorating the death of Imam al-Hussein ibn Ali. This is the first time they commemorate the anniversary in many years. Now to our correspondent in Karbala, Amr Abdul Hamid.
For more than a quarter of a century, they were not permitted to celebrate their religious holidays. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi Shiites from all over Iraq head to the holy sites in Karbala, commemorating the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein.
Disputes arise again between the Palestinian president and appointed Prime Minister Abu Mazen. Arafat refuses to appoint the former head of preventative security, Mohammed Dahlan, to the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
There are ongoing efforts to close the gap between the Palestinian president and the appointed Prime Minister, Mahmoud Abbas. Their differences surround the issue of whom will be the Minister of Internal Affairs. Meanwhile, members of Fatah gave Abu Mazen the option of declaring a cabinet that would be trustworthy by the legislative cabinet or resign from the position.
The acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, reaches 6 new provinces in China. Meanwhile, the capital's governor was fired due to his mishandling of the crisis. This is the end of the news in brief. Peace be upon you and welcome to the news. The U.S. retired General Jay Garner arrived to Iraq's capital, Baghdad. He is to assume his position as head of the administration, which will rule Iraq in the coming days. Garner, who arrived from Kuwait, promised to restore basic services to citizens. Garner is also scheduled to visit northern Iraq within 2 days. A team of 19 experts in the civil administration are accompanying Garner. They will be joined by more than 400 people next week.
Today is an important day for Iraq and for me personally. These were Jay Garner's first statements to the press as soon as his feet touched Iraqi soil. He came to assume his position as head of the temporary civil administration in Iraq. The administration will oversee the redevelopment of the country after a month of attack on Saddam Hussein's regime. Garner, who is 64 years old, was busy visiting the water and power plants. He also visited a hospital. Garner stated that his main priority is to reinstall basic services such as water and electricity as soon as possible. When he was asked about the biggest challenge facing him, he responded by saying that everything is a challenge. Garner added that his goal is to complete his mission and leave as fast as possible. However, he did not give a time frame for himself.
I wouldn't put 90 days as a mark on the wall. We will be here as long as it takes. We will leave fairly rapidly.
Garner is head of the Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance Office of the United States Department of Defense, created for the development of Iraq and to prepare for an interim government consisting of Iraqis. He will report to General Tommy Franks, the Commander-in-Chief in Iraq. Garner is accompanied by his British deputy Tim Cross, as well as his initial team of 19 civilian administrators, which is expected to increase to about 450 by next week. Most of the administrators will be those who were previously exiled during Saddam Hussein's regime.
For more details on Jay Garner's arrival to Baghdad, we go live to our correspondent Amr al-Munayiri. Amr, what were Jay Garner's prominent visits and activities?
Garner visited some hospitals and government administrations. However, the people on the streets of Baghdad have great resentment towards this visit. They also resent the U.S. forces' arrest yesterday of a prominent Shiite religious figure, Sheikh Al Fartusi, resulting in a massive Shiite demonstration near the Palestine Hotel, where more than 10,000 people protested. It just ended now. With me is Al-Sheikh Ahmed Al-Maturi, the organizer of this demonstration and the official representative of Sheikh Al Fartusi, who was arrested by the American forces. He is here to talk about the real reasons behind this demonstration. Sheikh, what is the basis for this demonstration? Is it to express the lack of enthusiasm for the arrival of Jay Garner, the military governor of Iraq appointed by the U.S.?
The demonstration is to protest the arrest of Sheikh Muhammad Al Fartusi, whose fate and the reason for his arrest remains unknown to us. We spoke with the American generals, but they told us they don't have any mandate over the fate of Sheikh Al Fartusi. The office of Sheikh Sadr from the area of Al Rasafi organized this protest. This small-scale demonstration is intended to denounce the American mistreatment of religious figures and to protest the arrest of Sheikh Al Fartusi and demand his release. I declare on the air that today we protested, tomorrow we will strike, and the day after I have no control over what the people in the streets will do. The people will decide for themselves. The Americans are now behaving like invaders, not like liberators. They are taking away our rights. I ordered the protesters to withdraw because the Americans started to provoke the demonstrators by raising their weapons and their voices. One of the Americans pulled me down from the speaker's podium, but some of the young men interfered. Thus, to prevent further bloodshed, I asked them to leave. But until now, I have not received any statements from any American or non-American official about the release of Sheikh Al Fartusi. Again, to prevent bloodshed, I ordered the withdrawal.
هل ترى في زيارة جي جاردنر وهو معه 400 من الخبراء في الشؤون المدنية؟
Do you see any hope of coordinating efforts between the Shiite and Iraqi leadership and Garner, who will be joined by 400 civilian experts to manage the civilian administration in Baghdad and Iraq in general?
ومع باقي القيادات هنا في العراق؟
First, the invaders should not take away our rights. This is very obvious. They invaded Iraq. Now, getting rid of the evil regime is something else. We do not have anything to do with that. There is no coordination between the Americans and the Shiites at all. The religious authority in the Holy Najaf has not and will not coordinate with any American entity. We absolutely refuse this kind of cooperation.
President Hosni Mubarak discussed with Saudi leaders on Monday the situation in the region following the Iraqi war, as well as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Saudi Arabia is the president's fourth destination on his current two-day regional tour. More details in this report.
Egypt and Saudi Arabia called on Monday for a swift restoration of security and stability in Iraq, and for allowing the Iraqi people to choose how to run their own affairs. The call came after a meeting between President Hosni Mubarak and Saudi King Fahd, the first meeting between the two Arab leaders since the fall of Baghdad to U.S. British forces on April the 9th. Officials said the two countries stressed the need for achieving security and stability in all parts of Iraq as soon as possible. Earlier, the two leaders' talks, which were attended by Saudi Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, also tackled the situation in the Palestinian territories and the destruction being carried out by Israeli troops. Mubarak's Gulf tour has already taken him to Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Earlier in the day, Mubarak discussed post-war Iraq and the Palestinian issue with the United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Officials said Mubarak exchanged views with Sheikh Zayed on the development of the situation in Iraq and the Palestinian cause, notably the roadmap to Middle East peace, which envisages the declaration of a Palestinian state by 2005. After the meeting, Foreign Minister Ahmed Meher said the two leaders stressed the necessity of combining efforts of the Arab countries to protect their interests in light of the events that have occurred in Iraq and in the occupied Palestinian territories. For his part, Information Minister Safwat al-Sharif noted that they underlined the need for preserving the territorial integrity of Iraq, for preventing internal conflicts in the country, for quickly restoring stability and security, and for establishing legitimate leadership there. Mubarak on Sunday visited Bahrain, where he met with King Hamad. Officials said the two leaders underscored the need to give the Iraqi people the opportunity to decide their political future and build a state of institutions on democratic basis. Mubarak's visit began with his arrival in Syria, where he met with President Bashar al-Assad on Iraq, as well as U.S. accusations against Damascus.
Forces in Iraq said they have seized Saddam Hussein's science minister Abdul Khaliq Abdul Ghafoor, and the leading Iraqi opposition group has claimed that Saddam's sole surviving son-in-law Jamal Mustafa Sultan al-Tikriti had surrendered to them, bringing to 7 the number of most wanted Iraqis in U.S. and opposition hands.
A spokesman for the U.S.-backed Iraqi National Congress, INC, claimed that Saddam Hussein's sole surviving son-in-law, Jamal Mustafa Abdullah Sultan al-Takriti, surrendered to them. According to Ahmed Shalabi's INC, Sultan was talked into returning to Iraq from Syria and giving himself up. The INC said the conditions of his surrender provided for giving him some security. Sultan is married to Saddam's youngest daughter, Hala, and was deputy head of the Tribal Affairs Office in Saddam's former regime, and had a significant political and intelligence role in his regime. He ranks number 40 out of the 55 top Iraqi officials wanted by the U.S. military. In another such development, U.S.-led forces in Iraq have seized Saddam Hussein's Minister of Higher Education and Scientific Research, Abdul Khaliq Abdul Ghafoor, ranked 43 on their list of 55 most wanted Iraqis. Abdul Ghafoor was taken into custody according to the U.S. Military Central Command. The two captures would bring to 7 the number of former Saddam Hussein regime leaders detained to date who figure on the U.S. list. The others that are now in U.S. custody after being captured last week are Hikmat al-Azawi, number 45 on the list. He is the former finance minister and deputy prime minister. Samer al-Aziz al-Najm, number 24 on the list and former oil minister and senior Ba'ath party leader in eastern Baghdad. Barzan Ibrahim Hassan al-Takriti, number 5 on the list. He is Saddam's half-brother and former head of intelligence service and presidential advisor. Watban Ibrahim Hassan al-Takriti, number 51 on the list. He's also Saddam's half-brother and former presidential advisor and one-time interior minister. And General Amr al-Saadi, number 55 on the list. He's a rocket specialist and Saddam's chief weapons advisor. He surrendered to coalition troops on April the 12th.
More aid arrived in Iraq on Monday, with 50 trucks carrying 1,400 tons of wheat flour from the World Food Programme being warehoused in Baghdad. Elsewhere in the Iraqi capital, civilians lined up outside the Republican Palace to register and sign up for jobs. Meanwhile, 7 parts of the city have had electricity restored, but Baghdad and many cities also suffer from power and water shortages. Security and lawfulness is still far from being a reality.
Electricity has been restored to parts of Baghdad after being cut for more than 2 weeks, and Iraqi engineers were working furiously Monday to restore power to the rest of the city. On Sunday night, a gas flame could be seen at the Al Dura power plant outside Baghdad, proof that the plant was working for the first time since U.S. bombing. Elsewhere in the capital, police were still on the lookout for looters. They arrested 6 of them and took them into custody in the Baghdad Police Academy, the only police facility in Baghdad which is still functioning and has jail cells. The World Food Programme, meanwhile, said a 50-truck aid convoy carrying 1,400 tons of wheat flour finally arrived in Baghdad following a 4-day trip during which it reportedly came under attack north of Baghdad. WFP will start distributing the wheat flour in May. In the same context, the International Committee of the Red Cross said the relief effort in Iraq was a vital juncture, adding that the biggest problem facing the new administration and relief agencies was the total collapse of the infrastructure. Meanwhile, most of the markets were open, and as telephone networks in Baghdad were damaged during US-led bombing, people were queuing up to pay to talk to their relatives, and one businessman was making money selling telephone minutes on his satellite phone. In the meantime, and days after Mohammed Mohsen al-Zubaydi, deputy of pro-US Ahmed Chalabi, proclaimed himself mayor of Baghdad, it remained unclear where his authority comes from or if it exists at all. No US forces or officials were present at his news conference held in a room that was once the coffee shop of the Palestine Hotel. Chalabi, the head of the Iraqi National Congress, was at the center of a security scare when shots were fired at his Baghdad compound, but he denied it had been an assassination attempt. The intensity of the U.S. military assault on the Iraqi army, the so-called shock and awe by military planners, hit Iraq's military infrastructure and forces, as well as civilian markets and neighborhoods. The extent of the destruction is readily apparent in and around key areas surrounding Baghdad, where hundreds of Iraqi military equipment and civilian vehicles attest to the extent of the US-led attack. Relatives continue to search for news of their loved ones in the destroyed regions around Baghdad, but many will never know what happened to them. Soldiers were buried where they died or where they were taken. Many bodies are unidentified and many graves unmarked.
Syria said it wanted a serious and constructive dialogue with Washington and welcomed remarks by U.S. President George W. Bush, in which he noted Damascus was heeding U.S. calls for cooperation. This came as Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and the visiting Spanish Foreign Minister Ana Palacio discussed the U.S. charges against Syria. Palacio's groundbreaking visit to Damascus came after repeated warnings and threats by the United States against Syria that it provided sanctuary to fleeing members of ousted Iraqi President Saddam Hussein's government. Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk al-Shara told a joint news conference with Palacio that his country never wanted a confrontation with Washington, adding the strong tone from Syria was a reaction to U.S. charges. He said that Syria has sealed its borders to Iraqis and required them to apply for visas. For her part, Palacio described the U.S. allegations against Syria as isolated statements and insisted that there was no such thing as a U.S. threat to Syria. Palacio said the situation between its friend Syria and its ally, the United States, did not require mediation.
We have sealed off the borders between Syria and Iraq, and anyone crossing the border should have a visa. And if you ask any questions about persons crossing the borders, then you better address the issue to the Immigration and Passport Department, not to the Syrian Foreign Ministry.
We have stressed, and as Spanish government, we have done that within the framework of the European Union from the beginning, from the first declaration of the special summit that was debated the Iraqi issue. We have backed this idea of territorial integrity, self-government as soon as possible by the Iraqis.
Palestinian mediators stepped up efforts to break a deadlock between Prime Minister-designate Mahmoud Abbas and President Yasser Arafat over security powers in a new government. Failure by the two leaders to form a cabinet before a self-imposed deadline that expires Wednesday would delay presentation by the United States of a long-awaited roadmap towards Israeli-Palestinian peace. Abbas, also known as Abu Mazen, wants former Gaza security chief Mohammed Dahlan to become interior minister in charge of Palestinian security forces. But Arafat has resisted Dahlan's appointment and the widely perceived bid to loosen the presidential grip on security. Palestinian officials said the mediators proposed naming Dahlan to the cabinet, but as a minister without a portfolio. However, there was no immediate word from Abbas, who threatened to quit over Arafat's rejection to Dahlan. Palestinian officials said the dispute between Arafat and Abbas was simply part of a democratic process.
There's still some disputes that are being worked out, and looking at the level of progress in the last week, I feel confident that before the end of the period specified for this task, which is the end of next Wednesday, I think that the Prime Minister will be able to agree with the others, including the President, on a list that is going to have a high chance of vote of confidence in the Parliament.
Palestinians want to see a new cabinet that is credible and efficient and that can do the work. They want to see that there's an agenda, and a political agenda that is both nation building, credible institutions that function, and political in terms of the negotiating process and representing and protecting Palestinian.
Though Saddam Hussein's regime has been overthrown, various issues pertaining to Iraq have still remained as the focal point of debates in the United Nations Security Council. Janan Saitofiri tells us more.
The Anglo-American war on Iraq is all but over, but the war of words at the UN Security Council is far from over. Last Wednesday, U.S. President George W. Bush called on the United Nations to lift economic sanctions on Iraq. With U.S. troops still on the ground, the White House maintains that the ouster of Saddam Hussein turns the sanctions unnecessary. The majority of UN diplomats, however, insist that sanctions should not be removed until the Security Council verifies that Iraq is entirely free of weapons of mass destruction. No such weapons, however, have yet been found in Iraq. Leading opponents of the Iraqi war, namely France and Russia, are much concerned about their missing share in the future of Iraq. Russia persists in the quick return of UN arms inspectors to war-torn Iraq. The two veto holders are now able to repeat their pre-war scenario and block immediate lifting of sanctions against Baghdad. But the U.S. is planning to ask the United Nations to phase out sanctions, in effect turning over the economy to a pro-U.S. government. Chief UN Weapons Inspector Hans Blix said last week that his experts could be back in Iraq within 2 weeks of a green light from the Security Council. But in London, the Times says there is a consensus in the Bush administration that Blix should retire, and that many U.S. officials were angry over his inspections in Iraq. A step-by-step approach is the latest U.S. tactic to counter those Security Council members that oppose lifting sanctions on Iraq without a broad role for the United Nations. U.S. Security Council will convene on June the 3rd to decide on Iraq's oil for food program, but a bigger challenge still lies ahead. Saito Firi, Tehran.
News in Brief is next. Having repatriated, Afghan immigrants can join Iran's investment market. The Interior Minister of Iran, Abdulwahid Mousavi declared that on Monday in a meeting with the visiting Minister of Immigration of Afghanistan, Inayatullah Nazari. Mr. Nazari, for his part, said the Afghan nation will never forget Iranians' hospitality towards Afghan refugees, and concluded by saying voluntary and global repatriation of the Afghan refugees can be highly effective in reconstruction of their homelands.
Mosaic, is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin,